Hi, this is Dr. Kramer with the first video in our module that reviews music history before the time of Beethoven. It is an overview of historical context for music of the Middle Ages. This video and the following videos of the Music History Before Beethoven module are intended to supplement your reading in Grove Music Online and in a music history textbook of your choice. In the next several videos, we'll be surveying music of the Middle Ages, Renaissance, and Baroque periods. We'll end this module with a look at the music of Haydn and Mozart from the classical period. When we study historical periods such as the Middle Ages, Renaissance, and Baroque periods, we typically start by trying to understand the wider historical context for music during the time. We then proceed to trace defining events and developments of the period. These may be developments of style, genre, technique, and/or institutions. Finally, we identify important composers and compositions. It is typical to start the study of Western classical music with the Middle Ages, but of course there was lots of music before then. This slide has a timeline comparing musical and historical events of the ancient Western world. To the left, you see the profile of Pythagoras on a coin. Pythagoras is sometimes called the first music theorist. To the right, there are images of the first music notation on tablet and then on papyrus, as well as a detail from a vase showing individuals performing music in ancient times. Music was used for ancient theater, dance, and worship. In fact, the Greek word musica referred to not only what we know as music today, but also poetry and the telling of history. Biblical texts, from those of the ancient Hebrews to those of the early Christians, record the use of music in worship. Writings of Plato and Aristotle refer to music as ethos, that is, as embodying ethics. Music only became more important within Christianity as Emperor Constantine legalized the faith in the 4th century Edict of Milan. We have descriptions of elaborate music used in Easter services in Jerusalem as early as 400 CE. About the same time, Augustine of Hippo, known by Christians as Saint Augustine, debated the use of music in Christian worship, noting that it could be both inspiring and distracting. Augustine was baptized in the font pictured at the bottom left of the slide. This is now in the basement of the cathedral in Milan, Italy. Christianity would eventually become the official religion of the Roman Empire, which would be then known as the Holy Roman Empire. It is important to note that the Roman Empire extended across a wide geographic area, and there were different rites of worship unique to different locales. These included the Old Roman Rite, the Byzantine Rite, and the Ambrosian Rite in Milan. Rome had to work hard to maintain its dominance and defend itself against attacks from outside tribes that were increasingly strong. In attempts to provide unity, Latin was promoted as the lingua franca. Emperors increasingly aligned themselves with the Church, as it was thought that the Church might also provide a cohesive force. The theory was that if people worshiped together in a similar way, they might also stick together during times of war and political strife. From roughly 600 through the 11th century, efforts were made to consolidate Christian worship across the empire. These efforts came to a head around 1800 when Charlemagne became the first Frankish and Christian emperor. His father had converted to Christianity before him. Around this time, the legend of the church liturgy as having been given to Pope Gregory the Great by the Holy Spirit through a dove also arose. Chant that was believed to have come directly from the Holy Spirit was perhaps naturally more respected and treated with less variance than other music. In the western parts of the empire, Gregorian chant prevailed, while the Easterners continued to worship using the Byzantine Rite. Chant was composed and performed for the Christian liturgy, that is, for the words of the Mass and the offices. Different chants were used for the different seasons of the Christian year, from Advent to Easter to ordinary time. Music was also found outside of church services and outside of the church. In what is now France, troubadours such as Bernard de Ventadorn sang at the most powerful courts of the time. In Germanic lands, these traveling court musicians were called Minnesingers. Walther von der Vogelweide was one of the best known. We have even fewer examples of instrumental music from the Middle Ages. We might imagine that most instrumental music was dance music, such as the 30-some estampes found in what is now called the Manuscrit du Roi. Similarly, King Alfonso the Wise oversaw the compilation of a large manuscript containing instrumental music and vocal music from his court in what is now Spain. The Middle Ages rather unpretentiously refers to the time between the ancient world and the Renaissance. Most of what we know as music of the Middle Ages falls between the years 800 and 1400. During the Middle Ages, the Western European world was coming into its own. In 1800, Western Europe was fragmented and relatively poor, but by around 1300 it boasted many strong rulers. Inventions such as the water wheel and the windmill led to larger and better fed populations. The first universities were established in Italy, France, and England. By the beginning of the 14th century, Western Europe had become as wealthy as its previously more affluent neighbors, the Byzantine Empire and the Arab states. Society in the Middle Ages was structured by a rigid system of three estates: the aristocracy, the church, and the serfdom. Not surprisingly, most of the music that was written down, and thus more likely to survive to the present day, was sponsored by the aristocracy or the church. In the 14th century, the advances of the earlier Middle Ages were challenged by increased war between Western rulers and the bubonic plague. Still, as we will see, music continued to be composed and performed. This ends the video on historical contexts of music during the Middle Ages.